Hello, ethics students. Today is our first online sort of lecture. I'm going to be talking about C.L. Stevenson's The Emotive Meaning of Ethical Terms. This is also our first day on meta-ethics. And I'll just focus here mostly on the core ideas in Stevenson's famous article that was originally published in Mind in 1937. Mind is an important philosophical journal. It's still in publication today. C.L. Stevenson, as you've seen from the outline I've sent you, and as you've seen from the reading, he defends what we call the emotive meaning of ethical terms. And I want to talk about that theory, talk about the nature of it, and the case he makes for it in today's lecture. It is my hope that you'll be going along with me using the outline that I sent you all. And I hope to shed some additional light on some of the points that I make in the outline. The first thing I want to talk about is the central question of Stevenson's essay. Stevenson indicates that the central issue that he's concerned with is he's trying to give an account of the meaning of ethical or evaluative assertions. So, for instance, he's trying to explain what does it mean to say that something X is good, or what does it mean to say that some sort of action is good. For instance, what would it mean to say something like Martin Luther King Jr. is a good man, or what would it mean to say that giving to charity is good, or that courage is a good quality. Now, early on in Stevenson's essay, he talks about what he calls interest theories of moral language, or interest theories about goodness. And I think he talks about these interest theories in large measure because he's going to give a view that has some similarity to interest theories, but nonetheless is different in what Stevenson regards as very significant in very significant ways. In other words, Stevenson's view maybe has some similarities to the interest theories that he discusses, but Stevenson's view, he believes, is very significantly different from those theories. But all of this raises the question, what are the interest theories? Well, interest theories about the meaning of the term good, they come in different varieties. Stevenson points out. He talks about how Thomas Hobbes, an important figure from the early modern period of philosophy, talks about how Thomas Hobbes has an interest theory of the good that says that the sentence X is good means something like I desire X. So, for instance, if I were to say that giving to charity is good, that would mean something like I desire to give to charity. Or if I say that Martin Luther King Jr. is a good man, then I'm saying something like I desire to associate with Martin Luther King Jr., something like that. Now, David Hume also has an interest theory about evaluative language or moral language. And on Hume's interest theory, Stevens says that according to Hume, to say something of the form X is good, that means something like this: most folks desire X, or most people desire X. So, for instance, on Hume's view about moral language or evaluative language, if I say that giving to charity is good, what that really means is that most people think giving to charity is good. Or what that means, if I say giving to charity is good, what that means is most folks desire to give to charity, say. And, notice I'm talking a lot about goodness here. I didn't talk much about badness on the outline that I shared with you. But, there will be corollaries to these claims regarding badness. I think, on Hobbes's view, if I say that abortion is bad, for instance, I'm just using that as an example. But if I say abortion is bad on Hobbes' view, that would mean something like I dislike abortion. Or on Hume's view, if I say something like euthanasia is bad. And what that means is something like most folks dislike euthanasia, you see. Now, after sort of introducing these interest theories, Stevenson goes on to offer criticisms of these theories. And I've outlined his three central criticisms of the interest theories. Take a look at your outline if you are able to. You'll notice the first problem with the interest theories that Stevenson talks about is what he calls the problem of disagreement. The basic argument structure here is that if interest theories are right, then there cannot be moral disagreements. Stephen says, but there are moral disagreements. Therefore, these theories are not right. That outline, it needs some filling in here. Most importantly, I think the first premise there needs some explanation. If interest theories are right, then there cannot be moral disagreements. Why would somebody say that? And it seems to me that the reasoning for this is that, and I had this jotted down, I want to be careful with this. Seems to me what's on Stevenson's mind here is consider Hobbes's view, right? On Hobbes's view, if someone, say Fred, claims that X is good, and then someone else, Jim, says that X is not good, then Fred really is saying, I like X, and Jim is saying, I don't like it. But if that's all that's going on when Fred says that X is good and Jim says X is not good, well, there's no real disagreement between Fred and Jim because what they're both saying is right, assuming that they're both speaking authentically. There's no real disagreement there. It's perfectly consistent for Fred to like something X and for Jim to not like it, right? Again, imagine Fred says Martin Luther King Jr. Is a good man, and Fred says Martin Luther King Jr. is not a good man. Well, on Hobbes' view, that would then mean that the first person, Fred, is saying Martin Luther King, or the first person, Fred, is saying, I don't like Martin, or I'm sorry, the first person, Fred, is saying, I like Martin Luther King Jr. The second person, Jim, is saying, I don't like Martin Luther King Jr., but those are perfectly consistent claims, and there's no disagreement between them. One of them simply might like King Jr., and the other one might not like him. There's no disagreement here. Stevenson goes on to point out that, even on Hume's view, there'll be a similar problem. One person might live within the Catholic community, and within the Catholic, right, and a person might say, a person living in a Catholic community might say abortion is bad. By that meaning, most folks dislike it, and in his Catholic community that will be true. And another person from some sort of liberal secular community might say abortion is good, and all that will mean for him on Hume's view is that most folks think abortion is acceptable, or it just mean most people like abortion or are not troubled by abortion. But there's no real disagreement between them either relative to their own communities. They both are saying something that's true. And so for these sorts of reasons, Stevenson wants to say that, again, if these interest theories were correct, there could be no moral disagreements. But then Stevenson takes it as obvious, and I think it is obvious that there are moral disagreements, all right? If there's anything that we disagree about, it's things like the ethics of abortion, the ethics of affirmative action, what it is to be a good person, who counts as being good, who counts as being bad, right? Of course there are moral disagreements. So if the interest theories don't allow for moral disagreements, then we have reason to think that those theories are mistaken. Now, another problem, and this is, again, on our outline, another problem that Stevenson says interest theories have concerns what I want to call the argument from magnetism, and I've outlined this on our handout I shared with you all. And actually, the argument from magnetism, it's really a problem for Hume's interest theory in particular. It's not clear to me that Hobbes's view, and I don't think Stevenson regards Hobbes's view as having the problem of magnetism, but Hume's theory does, and I think Stevenson is right about this. Now, what I have on my outline says that Hume's interest theory has the problem of magnetism. When we say X is good, we are attracted to X. We want to have or to do X. But on Hume's interest theory, X is good simply means most folks desire X. And the problem here is that one may not personally desire X while acknowledging that most folks do, right? Just plugging this into an example I've worked with already today. On Hume's interest theory, if I say Martin Luther King Jr. is a good man, what that means on Hume's interest theory is that most folks think, or most folks desire to be with or to be like Martin Luther King Jr. Now the problem is that I could assert that most folks desire to be like or to be with Martin Luther King Jr. And yet I might not personally have any desire to be like or be with Martin Luther King Jr. at all. And this is a problem because if what I'm doing is if I'm saying that the claim Martin Luther King Jr. is good is equivalent to most folks' desire to be like or to be with Martin Luther King Jr., and given that I can perfectly well acknowledge that most people desire to be like or to be with Martin Luther King Jr. while not wanting to be like or with him myself, then it would seem that my assertion that he's good has no magnetism for me. Right, on Hume's view, I could acknowledge the goodness of something without feeling attracted to the thing that I'm saying is good or having any desire to do or be with that which I'm calling good. So there is that problem. A third problem, which Stevenson thinks that any interest theory is faced with, concerns what I'm calling the argument from scientific resolution of moral disagreement. Stevenson maintains that not all questions of the goodness of something should be resolvable by purely empirical scientific means. He says the interest theories of Hobbes and Hume would have us understand all moral disputes as resolvable by appeals to empirical psychology or sociology. Therefore, such interest theories are mistaken. So let's talk about that a little bit more. The question could be raised here: why is it that the interest theories of Hobbes and Hume would have us understand all moral disputes as resolvable by appeals to empirical psychology or sociology? Right? Well, let's look at it this way. Suppose one person says that abortion is good, and another person says that abortion is bad. Right? Well, on Hobbes' view, when the one person says that abortion is good, all that he really means is, I desire to live in a society where abortion is allowed, or something like that. And the person who says abortion is bad is really saying something like, I desire to live in a society where abortion is not allowed. Right? And to determine whether those people speak the truth on that analysis of the meaning of moral assertion, you could just sort of engage in an empirical study of what the actual likes and dislikes of the two speakers are. And if the first person indeed does not desire to live in a society, or if one speaker genuinely desires not to live in a society where abortion is allowed, then it will be true for him that abortion is bad. And if the other person genuinely desires to live in a society where abortion is allowed, it will be true for him that abortion is good, right? And you could sort of, resolve the dispute between them by acknowledging that each of them speaks the truth relative to their own likes or dislikes. And similar sorts of points could be made regarding Hume's view, right? On Hume's view, if one person says abortion is bad and another one says that abortion is good, I mean, what does that amount to on Hume's view? Well, on Hume's view, when you say abortion is good, what you're saying is most folks in society like it or something like that. And when you say abortion is bad on Hume's view, that's just sort of saying that most folks in society dislike it. Well, who's speaking the truth there? You could just engage in empirical psychology and run a survey of the society and try and get what the majority opinion of the society is, and that will tell you, on Hume's view, whether abortion is good or bad. But it just seems ridiculous to think that we can resolve moral disputes by running surveys of what most people in society think about an issue. And so for this reason, Stevenson thinks the interest theories have got a problem. So that's all I have to say about such interest theories and all that Stevenson has to say about them, I think. But Stevenson goes on to do something interesting after offering those criticisms of the Hobbesian and Humean interest theories. He goes on and he points out that those criticisms that he makes, those three criticisms of the interest theories, they suggest that an adequate account of the meaning of evaluative discourse, or an adequate account of the meaning of the term good, must meet three criteria, right? Assuming those three criticisms of the interest theory are correct, those criticisms suggest that there are certain criteria that an adequate theory of the meaning of moral language must meet. And these criteria are that, one, an adequate account of the meaning of good must, one, allow that good can be the subject of disagreement. It must, two, allow that good has a magnetic character, that what is perceived as good is desired by those who perceive it as such. And three, it must allow that goodness not be determinable on purely scientific grounds. All right? And so the idea is Stevenson wants to say that an adequate theory of moral language and an adequate theory of what it means to say X is good, it must meet those three conditions, right? An adequate theory about the claim X is good and the meaning of X is good must allow that there could be disagreement regarding the goodness of X, must allow that to say X is good has some sort of magnetic character, such that when I say X is good, I will want to have X or to do X. And must allow that we can't just determine the goodness of X simply by engaging in empirical psychological investigation or sociological surveys. And so what Stevenson wants to do, he wants to give a theory about the meaning of evaluative discourse and about give a theory about the meaning of X is good that can meet those three criteria. And so what he does is he opts for what he calls an emotive theory of evaluative language. And so this leads to the question, what is his emotive theory? On the outline, what I said about this is that, what I said is the following. While it may look as though saying X is good is to make a factual or descriptive claim about X, such as X has some property of goodness, or X is desired by me, as Hobbes would say, or X is desired by most people, as Hume would say, right? While it may look as though X is good to, X is good as to make a factual claim, Stevenson denies that such an assertion is factual. He denies that it is descriptive at all. Rather, on Stevenson's view, to say X is good is merely to express a positive attitude to X and to encourage others to take up such a positive attitude towards X as well. So, for instance, to say Martin Luther King Jr. was a good man is not to state a fact about him at all, on Stevenson's view. Rather, it is to say something like, please take a positive attitude towards Martin Luther King Jr. Or Stevenson might also be understood as telling us that when you say Martin Luther King Jr. was a good man, all you're really saying is something like this: Martin Luther King Jr., yay! And again, there will be corollaries for this, right? If I say Hitler was a bad man, right? Well, on Stevenson's view, that would be equivalent to something like this: please take a negative attitude towards Hitler, or Adolf Hitler, boo. But, for Stevenson, this is just the nature of what it is to make a moral claim, right? And the idea here for Stevenson, when you're making a moral claim, you're not, again, stating any facts about the world. You're just expressing attitudes, and these attitudes get expressed in the hope of persuading others to accept your own pro attitudes to those that you think are good, and to accept your own negative attitudes to those that you think are bad, or something like this. You see what I'm getting at? And so, there are no moral facts at all on Stevenson's view. Because when we make moral assertions or make evaluative claims, those just aren't the sorts of things that involve stating any facts that could be true or false at all. Rather, when we make evaluative assertions, we're just emoting, just expressing our feelings or attitudes towards something. And typically, these moral or evaluative assertions are made to influence others to share with us the kinds of attitudes that we have on Stevenson's view. Now, what Stevenson does after sort of explicating what his own emotive theory is, he goes back and he revisits those criteria of what an adequate theory of evaluative language needs to do. And so, for instance, he goes back and he talks about allowing disagreement, right? Again, Stevenson's got this view that an adequate theory about X is good must allow for disagreements about whether X is good, right? An adequate theory of moral language must allow for disagreements regarding moral things. On the outline regarding this, I wrote that the emotive theory allows for the expression of genuine disagreements about what is good. According to the emotive theory, moral debates exist to resolve differences in interest. When you say abortion is bad, and I say no, it isn't, we have different interests that are in conflict. As such, our disagreement may not be a disagreement about any facts, but there is a disagreement between us nonetheless, reflected in our disagreement in interests or attitudes, right? So for instance, maybe Joe Aharoni wants to say that abortion is bad. And when he says this on the emotive view, what he's really saying is boo or down with abortion. That's what the assertion really amounts to on the emotive view. And when he says abortion is bad, he's expressing his negative attitude towards it with the hope of influencing others to agree with Joe's negative attitude. But if I think abortion is morally acceptable or good, then when I say abortion is good, what I'm suggesting is that or what I'm really saying is abortion, yay, or I'm saying please do support abortion rights. But notice here, Joe and I won't be in disagreement about any facts regarding abortion necessarily. We won't necessarily be in any disagreement about any facts. But there's still a disagreement between us. It's a disagreement in attitude. He's right when he says abortion is bad. Joe's trying to get people to adopt a negative attitude towards it. When I say abortion is good, I'm trying to get people to adopt a positive attitude towards it. And our interests here are in conflict. I'm interested in getting people to adopt a pro attitude. Joe's trying to get people to adopt a negative attitude, right? And so there can be disagreements in attitudes on the emotive theory of moral discourse. Stevenson goes on and talks about magnetism, right? Stevenson had pointed out that there's some sort of problem of magnetism when he talked about the interest theories of Hobbes and Hume. But Stevenson wants to say that on his emotive theory of moral discourse and evaluative language, there is no problem of magnetism. Stevenson, the basic idea of Stevenson's argument seems to be something like this, that to say X is good should reflect the speaker's desire for X. The emotive theory captures this because in saying X is good, the speaker expresses his approval of X. And in doing so, this implies that he finds X desirable, right? So if I say giving to charity is good, on the emotive theory, what that means is something like, please do give to charity, or giving to charity, yippee, right? But if what I'm saying is please do give to charity, or if what I'm saying is giving to charity, yippee, this would suggest that I myself have a pro attitude. I myself approve of giving to charity. I'm likely to desire or want to give to charity myself. So on the emotive theory, the magnetism of goodness is captured when we say things like X is good, or giving to charity is good, or Martin Luther King Jr. was a good man, etc. Right? And so the emotive theory, it can make sense of, right? The emotive theory of the nature of moral discourse can make sense of the existence of ethical disagreements, and understand them as disagreements in attitudes. It can make sense of the magnetism of saying that something is good. Lastly, Stevenson talks about the issue of scientific resolvability. On the outline, I talked about this issue as follows, and this is how I understand Stevenson's point, that not all moral disagreements should be resolvable by empirical scientific means. Emotivism does not allow for this. Right? In other words, emotivism does not allow for all moral disagreements to be resolved by scientific means. And emotivism does not allow this because on the emotive view, moral claims are not fact stating. And sometimes two people can continue to have different incompatible attitudes towards something, even if they agree on all of the relevant facts. Right? Let's go back to the abortion issue for a moment. Okay, again, imagine Joe Aharoni says abortion is bad, and I say abortion is good. On the emotive view, again, what Joe was saying is when he says abortion is bad, he's saying something like "boo, down with abortion." And and when I say abortion is good, on the emotive view, all that means is abortion, yay, up with abortion. And what Stevenson wants to suggest is that Joe and I might agree on all of the facts surrounding abortion. We might agree on the status of fetuses, we might agree on issues regarding the development of fetuses and what fetuses are like in the first trimester and second trimester. We might agree about what's involved in the practices of abortion, etc. We might agree on all of this, and yet still have different attitudes towards abortion. Joe's being a negative one, mine being a positive one. And so, even if we understood all of the scientific facts surrounding abortion, surrounding Joe's psychology, surrounding my psychology, surrounding the beliefs of members in society, we could still continue to have this disagreement in attitude about abortion. And as such, this would just suggest that you could not resolve the dispute between us, the disagreement between us regarding the ethics of abortion, using any empirical scientific means. I mean, if we knew all the facts and we still had different attitudes, the dispute, which is clearly a moral dispute, would not be resolvable by scientific means, right? And so in the end, Stevenson, it does seem to me he's got a view that's kind of like the interest theories of Hobbes and Hume, but it's more sophisticated in certain ways. And Stevenson's arguing that his theory can avoid these three problems that the interest theories face. And by avoiding those problems, Stevenson thinks he's giving a more plausible theory about what it means to say X is good or what it means to say X is bad. He's giving a more plausible theory about the nature of evaluative discourse or moral discourse, because it avoids problems of earlier theories like the interest theories, and thus he thinks it's a better approach to understanding the nature of ethical discourse, right? And again, it's important to keep in mind that, right, on Stevenson's view, to make a moral claim is not to describe any facts about the world. It's not to assert any facts about the world. Moral claims, on his view, again, they're just expressions of our attitudes, and these expressions of our attitudes, when we say things like Martin Luther King Jr. was good or giving to charity is good, these are intended to influence the attitudes and thinking of others. And next time we meet, I'll talk about a relatively famous critical reply to C.L. Stevenson that was articulated in the work of a virtue theorist named Alasdair MacIntyre, in a very widely read book that came out in the early 1980s called After Virtue. And he will give a kind of way of responding to Stevenson's emotivism. I'll see you next time. Y'all take care. Bye-bye.